So here's the agenda I was thinking of today that I'll go through. First, I was feeding my daughter some formula, reading my stored up articles. I like to use this very old application called Instapaper, not Instagram, to basically keep track of things I might want to read at some point. It's nice, and it also like cleans up all the crap on the page and just gives you a nice little collection of the text to read over. And I came across this one article about how FedEx had modernized the way they do stuff, their long journey, and just some tips from their I think their CIO and some other people about that journey. And there's this one part in it that you can see that I thought would be worth commenting on as far as planning out the way you do your transformation, and also making sure it's possible instead of getting stuck in analysis paralysis driven by fear. And then this morning I was thinking about how, I don't know about you, but you read all this productivity stuff and they're always telling you should say no to more things and focus on what's valuable, which, to use my favorite analogy, sounds a lot like when, the dentist tells you should floss and people tell you all these good habits you should do. It's, we all know we should do that. And if we were already doing it, we wouldn't be complaining that it's something we need to do, and we wouldn't need advice from people to do it. Which, you have to learn how to take obvious advice with a bit of grace, or people will stop giving it to you. And then finally, just a little follow-up note on some strategy talk. I read another little thing that I can't really tell you that much about, but at least I can reference it in case you want to read it. So first of all, one of the things that comes up often when I'm talking with organizations or reading about them or whatever, something that happens often in organizations that are trying to improve the way they do software, to improve the way their business runs, to be more like a tech company, to have the old digital transformation, is that they start talking about the criticality and the difficulty of things and how hard they are to change. And a part of that is, as mentioned, the critical nature of what they need to do. And the most recent example of this was great. I heard someone tell me about, a company that did this kind of thing, that if their operations broke down, they wouldn't be able to deliver organs on time, and, transplant patients would die. And then you always hear, about rockets and things like that. So if you talk with defense people, they have, military machines and tools that have to be done critically. And then, of course, there's banks. The money has to transfer around. Pretty much every business, unless they're, I don't really know what you would be in. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a value business. But every business has something critical that if it broke, things would go poorly, right? And, there's extreme examples of that. And so often when it comes to changing the way things are done, people directly go to these very critical, risky, difficult things. And the difficulty of it might, it might also be like, we have it running on an older architecture or an older system. It's highly governed, but it has all of these difficult things about why it can't be changed, right? People get very focused on the problems that they have and the blockers that they have and why things can't be improved. And you can't do the obvious thing, whether it's flossing your teeth or saying no to prioritize thing, but you can't do the obvious stuff of just switching over to doing agile development, all sorts of stuff like that. So as you can see here in reading through this piece that I had stored up, there was a little bit of a quote. I forget which one Carter is. I should probably know that, being in the world of selling software to big companies like FedEx. But whatever, you can read it in the article. And as you can see, they got a lot of stuff going on here, and it accidental architectures is that's a great, I use the phrase tech debt a lot, but accidental architecture is a fun phrase. Let me fix that. Nothing, oddly enough, for how little I care about most things, punctuation done poorly drives me crazy. And so I always have to go through and fix it. And you can imagine when I've, published in outside of the U.S. where they spell things incorrectly with S's instead of Z's, and they throw just U's in for no reason. I typically had to go, I used to write a column for the Register, and when I made a book collecting together all those columns, and I'm pretty sure I went through and corrected all their incorrect spelling to be correct, which is to say the American English spelling of things. But now that we've got that fixed, Although, this is still distressingly incorrect here. Oh yeah, I see what happened. Because you see, you've got a double quote, and inside the double quote, he's doing a quote, what some people call scare quotes, which I think just means that they don't like it. I don't know about scare quotes. Anyways, so now you could be this attribution. You could be saying, but Cote, this is an incomplete sentence. This attribution is weird. I know. I struggle with what to do with that as well. I often like to put it in italics, but the problem is if you italicize from, you're going to have to unitalicize it because, as you know, you need to not italicize the name of an article. You know, italicize a book or a movie or other major work, a podcast, but not episodes in the podcast, so forth and so on. So I just kind of let that one. I prioritized saying no to the little goblin, the grammar goblin. Anyways, if you look at the second part, this got me thinking about this point of like focusing on the difficult things, right? And that is, you know, as you're figuring out how to transform what you're doing, and for FedEx here in the article, you can see it's like a 5 or 10 year sort of journey, as people like to say. But I think it does show how you kind of get beyond that, the analysis paralysis of thinking too much and planning too much and analyzing too much and making too many Excel spreadsheets of matrix of requirements and rankings and having the meeting to determine weighting, and then you go talk to all of the various heads of departments to kind of like you do the pre-wire for the meeting to get their priorities to make sure that they're on board because you've aligned to what they want. And, you know, next thing you know, a year or two later, you're sort of ready to proceed on stuff and your company has been acquired or acquired some other company and the businesses that you're in are different and the competition has changed. And then you're just kind of hanging out with these accidental architectures, but you got a really cool Word doc and presentation of how you should have changed things 2 years ago. So I think instead of getting stuck in that kind of completist, let's solve the biggest problems first, right? You know, I think it's better to kind of go to the less complex, but equally important sort of small things and sort of start nibbling away at them and kind of build up to that, right? Now, this is what I'm always talking about, of starting small, right? Coming up, identifying a small series of projects that you can do that are real projects, not just experiments or POCs, if you will, science projects, as people will derogatorily refer to them, but actual projects that you have. I always software that runs parts of your business, right? I always think of like Store Finder or ATM apps. Like those are perfect, right? They're often very low risk. There's really no customer data involved in them. And it's more or less just a static data set of the locations that you could update at most on a 24-hour basis, right? So it's basically a read-only data that only changes every 24 hours, and you could freeze it, right? Like not a big deal. It's very simple type of application that often is neglected. However, probably is heavily used by your customers. And so just modernizing that application, even if you don't change the UI for it, it'll give you the chance to learn how to do things in a new way and kind of get a sense of how it would be operating. And then, true to the point of starting small and building up, you can start to think about integrating it with bigger and bigger things, right? So a store finding application is valuable for finding what's at a store, but you might also want to know the inventory that the store has, right? You might also want to update it with holiday hours and other hours. Here in the Netherlands, they because of recent COVID stuff, they suggested to stores that they should set up hours for older people to go, to the exclusion of the young people, I guess. And that might be another variable thing that you would want to put in, right? So you start with that small thing that's customer facing, and you figure out ways how to learn how you're doing things and grow out from there. Now, you could also do that with internal-facing applications, right, where there's a lot more tolerance for scrappiness, I guess. And internally, I mean, companies, for the most part, they run on processes where a decision is made. This is why companies like ServiceNow are always trying to get into workflow management, right? They start off with managing tickets. A request comes in. You categorize and prioritize the request. You go through a decision tree with often multiple people involved who go back to the person requesting the service. And if it's like me, the answer is always no. or that, it works on my box. And then the person submits it again and it has to get escalated to someone else and goes through another decision tree. Like, this is the constant thing that's happening in organizations as they're trying to make decisions about things, because otherwise it's automated and standardized. So it's the exceptions that you have to have a process around. So workflows like that, like when humans need to approve some process executing, some procurement order, maybe even, authorizing a mortgage that looks a little weird or something like that. Those are also good applications to focus on. But anyhow, the analogy I was thinking about this is, one of my favorite jokes for explaining not really figuring out how to solve a problem, not kind of looking at the whole system of the problem. And that's the joke of the drunk underneath the lamppost, right? So there's this joke, and you can tell it comes from a different era where, you don't immediately talk about a drunk in public being a terrible thing that should not be made jokes about. But there's you can imagine a guy with the little like 50s hat and kind of a loose tie, and he's sort of hanging out underneath a lamppost looking around, and a police officer comes by and says, "Oh, what are you doing?" And the drunk says, "I've lost my keys, so I'm looking for them." And the police officer says, "Well, okay, I would be happy to help you find your keys, because, I guess, whatever." And he says, "So where did you lose them?" And the drunk says, "Oh, I left them back in the bar. I lost them in the bar." And then the cop says, "Well, why are you looking here underneath the lamppost?" And the drunk says, "Well, the lighting is so much better here." And I'll pause. Very funny. But the point is that people often, they have a problem they're trying to solve, and they're looking in the wrong place just because it seems easier, or it seems more important, or there's some sort of, I forget which bias this is, but there's some sort of disconnect about what the system is. And similarly, right, this is why I immediately thought of this, is you're thinking about you want to improve the way your organization functions, right? This goes down to a digital transformation initiative. This goes down to we need to improve the way that we do software so that we can have more of a programmable business, right? We can innovate and change our business more rapidly than the static way that it is, because we're dependent on a tool set, on a software supply chain that is takes a long time and is very static. So you're focusing on, so you get there and then you find the hardest, most important, most difficult things to transform and improve, and you start focusing on those and using them to generate questions that you have, problems to solve. You give all of us vendors who are trying to get you to buy us stuff a bunch of busy work to try to solve that. You start talking about multi-phase commits and transactions, when really what you should do is you should stop looking under the lamppost of pain and difficulty there and start looking elsewhere for simpler things to do, to kind of try out and test out some ideas and start learning and transforming on the edges. And I think what you do with that, to apply the general model of uppercase D disruption thing, right? So again, if you remember from yesterday, when I gave kind of my hand-wavy summary, a lot of what, the distinction, why I call something uppercase disruption, is because there's a very technical thing from the innovator's dilemma of essentially uppercase disruption is that you have a market incumbent that has a fully featured, higher priced offering, which seemed normal at the time, and a smaller vendor or smaller competitor comes in and comes up with a less feature rich, cheaper, that is a arguably worse alternative, right? And finds a market to sell that, right? So maybe someone doesn't need a big fancy car, they just need a smaller car. So you make this smaller car that is cheaper, is smaller, doesn't have all of the features and the horsepower or whatever the bigger car. And you have the whole, 60s, 70s, and later 80s introduction of non-American cars into America, right? I think most famously, I forget if this is part of Big D disruption theory, but there's the case study of how Honda figured out how to sell motorcycles in California, and they kind of use this. It's not exactly an uppercase D disruption thing, but it's also a good jobs to be done study. But it kind of goes over not only to finding the product market fit as they did, but also how getting a foothold in kind of a lower part of the market allows you to grow up, to expand into a larger part, right? So similarly, when you're trying to avoid looking under the lamppost, you can start with these smaller projects with your store finder things, your processes, and the success that you've built up there, you can start to build up and go up market, go to bigger and bigger, more complex things as you're comfortable with the way things are and you have more time to think through it. So, don't get distracted by difficult things, and don't allow it to slow you down. Just try to keep moving and try to learn and build up. Now, this is a good chance for the interstitial, your CTA, because are you interested in figuring out how to prioritize those projects to work on? Are you looking under a lamppost and you're blinded, one, by the intoxication you have of being beset by all the difficulties you have in your organization, but two, you don't know how to look anywhere else because the lighting is so good there. What you need is a good, friendly police officer to come by and change your view of where you should be looking. I don't know if that analogy really fits. Not really, because the police officer in that story doesn't really bring a solution. It's really the teller, the joke teller, who kind of hints at the solution, or the audience hopefully has the epiphany of what the solution is, and then that's the humor. I remember there's one major theory of humor. I forget if it's from Aristotle, but that the one of the essences of a good joke is that the audience expects one thing, but then all of a sudden you come up with another thing, and that kind of discontinuity in their mind is some kind of delight that can lead to humor, which sounds structurally sound. Anyhow, but are you interested in trying to figure out how to stop looking under the lamppost and kind of start doing things? Well, you know what you can do? You can you can get a free workshop with us. Now, this workshop might be an hour, just kind of sorting things out, but we also go up to half day or full day workshop sessions where we really, if you remember some of the interviews I've had on here, we sit down and kind of sort through what the priorities of the organization are. We try to boil that down to the actual IT projects, the software projects that you have, and then kind of cross that with the viability and the timeliness, the usefulness of when you would do those projects and if they would be successful or even possible. And we kind of help you plan out the strategy, the plan that you would have for modernization and how you'd roll it out and scale it up more and more. Now, if you want to schedule one of those things, what you can do is I'll show you, is you can just go to cote.pizza. And this goes to my magic call to action page here on Pivotal. And see this software development office hours? You just click on learn more and you can fill that out. And it's good to put your actual information in here because we don't have the technology yet to go through false information and determine who the original person was. That's not the business that I'm in. Now, you can also just email me at the mysterious email address, cotem@vmware.com. That's COTEM. I don't know who this Cotem character is, but keep getting their email. So if you're Cotem, you should probably contact me because I'm getting your email. I don't know if that's a first name or a last name, but if you send it to cotem@vmware.com, I'll get that email nonetheless. So the next from the agenda, let me get some coffee here. The other thing, as I was joking about in laying out the agenda, is, people are always saying, if you want to be more productive, you want to do your sort of enterprise self-help. And I think they say this in your personal life self-help as well, that you need to learn how to prioritize things. You've got to discover what your priorities are, decide on them, and then act accordingly. Now, a large part of what they mean by act accordingly is if something's not a priority, or it doesn't fit in that Eisenhower matrix of urgent and important, then you basically don't do that, or you delay doing it, but basically you say no to that. And that's the essence of a tremendous amount of productivity stuff, right? All the way from getting things done. Like I like getting things done, something I definitely don't follow because that's a lot of work. But getting things done is like basically a prioritization system, but it adds two things that are really interesting. It kind of makes you focus on the next activity. And then it has this other thing that is, psychologically helpful, is it has this concept of capturing things or logging them. That even if you're not going to do it, what you should do is write it down so that you don't stress out about forgetting it. And then this kind of frees up your mind. You're kind of saying no by writing it down and moving on, and it frees up your mind to focus on other stuff. But from whether it's getting things done or just a simple to-do list, right? Like, and ranking a to-do list or a backlog. Essentially what you're doing is you're figuring out what to say no to, which I find constantly frustrating, right? Because I'm one of these people who I get very pleased when people are happy with me, and it's very easy to make people happy with you if you say yes to them, and then actually deliver on it. Whereas, like, longer term things that don't necessarily result in an immediate deliverable or have a clear deliverable, like saying yes to them just like assigns you a bunch of homework, and it's hard to get satisfaction out of that. Even though longer term, everyone knows they're more satisfying. But hence the problem with self-help stuff is intuitively it makes sense, but in practice, it's I don't know. It's hard to convince yourself to do things like floss your teeth and so forth. I think what we learned in the late 2000s is you have to gamify it to give you short-term joy in following a long-term plan, so you get little points along the way. You get kind of feedback that you're doing something rather than just waiting for that big payoff at the end. I don't know. Anyhow, so that is like a thing to master, right? And it kind of gets down to the first point of, prioritizing these small projects. Kind of counterintuitively, you need to say no. You need to learn to say no to big, critical, important things. That's going to be an intuition you have, right? Especially if you have signed up with someone as comprehensive and therefore value-bearing as the VMware Tanzu stack. And what I mean by that is that you're going to spend some money on it. It's not free. And oftentimes, we're going to try to get you to spend as much money as possible up front because we can all agree on money. So what that's going to mean is you're going to have this desire to, beyond just the Tanzu stuff, but your overall process, right? There's going to be a big figure behind it. The entire initiative to transform everything over. And you're going to need to show a large ROI, right? So you're going to sign up for this huge business case that you're going to be returning money on. So you're going to go find the biggest, hairiest, most critical thing because it's going to help you make that ROI. And you've got to kind of learn to say no to that gigantic upfront thing and instead start smaller and kind of build up to that. But I've been thinking a lot, so I've been observing now that we're in the no one actually travels around time. It kind of means on a global basis, all of the spokespeople or people involved in a sales meeting who aren't the actual salespeople, they kind of get involved, such as myself, in talking globally to people. And I've noticed what is equal parts distressing but also educational that I've started to learn from is a lot of people higher up in the chain than me, the executives we'll call them, they have a habit of very frequently saying no to things that to me seem like you would always say yes to, right? Like we have this gathering, we've got some gigantic account that wants to have an online EBC, and it would be great if you could join us. And they'll just in a 1-sentence or 2-sentence email, just straight up say, no, I'm focusing on other stuff. Now, there's a lot more florid language around it. That's part of, I think that's part of what, and a lot of books go over this. But there's a lot of art to knowing how to say no. And I think I should go look this book up for the show notes, but there's a good book written by some tech people about, learning to say no and prioritize stuff. I remember reading it. Is this the case? Where was I? When I was in Portugal, I think. I remember reading this book, and it, this is the current difference, the current development in the idea of saying no that I think has come about is there's a lot of emphasis on how to write the email saying no, excuses to use, as I would think about them, right? The 10 ways to say no. But I've been thinking about that a lot, right? And oftentimes they provide a reason, right? But the reason is it's like coherent, but it still doesn't get over my intuition to be like, you should eat all of the pie put in front of you, right? So if someone says there's an important sort of like prospect or customer meeting, then you should make it happen. But that's obviously not the way to go about being happy in life. And I think there's a lot to learn from me being on these threads of executives who say no to meetings that I sort of think are important. Now, the reason I'm often on that thread is that they think I should not be saying no to it. And they're kind of kicking it down to me, which is fine. That's often a function that I provide, especially, I think, relevantly if it's something happening in the Europe, Middle East, or Africa, which is mostly, with some exceptions, mostly Europe, then yeah, naturally, it's my job to, that is my priority to do those things. So it sort of makes sense that they would say no, because it should be prioritized over to me. But anyways, let me, you don't care. I'll just put this book in later when I edit this. But I think that that treatment is pretty good. Now, let me bring up something else related to this that I read recently. There's this guy, Rands, and he's one of these quippy management people. I don't think I've ever actually read his books, but he's one of these developers, engineer types who's trying to apply engineering thinking to, I don't know if you call it white collar work or office work, but to non-engineering stuff. And he's been doing these book thing, these kind of taking a picture of a notebook, which is genius, right? Like, this is the kind of thing over the years I kind of do, but I think of is that to I think it was Voltaire, often attributed to Mark Twain instead. But I think it was Voltaire who said, I apologize for the length of this letter. I didn't have time to make it short. And oftentimes you can say, I guess the opposite is, I apologize, I didn't type this up. I didn't have time to make it short or type it up, but instead you write this down. And there's an interesting idea he's developing here is 5-minute cancels. And, a lot of what engineers focus on when they're optimizing non-engineering time is meetings, right? And because I have a lot of mixed feelings about productivity people talking about meetings. And because a lot of what they amount to is that people do meetings poorly, which is, again, sort of back to you should floss regularly. It's kind of like, I don't know, it's almost too easy. But whatever, let's not digress with that. But there is an interesting, as he says, red flag here, which is that if a meeting gets canceled 5 minutes before it was supposed to happen, that meeting was probably, there's always exceptions. Someone might have to go pick up their kid because they developed a bloody nose, or, some scheduling thing might have happened and there's another immovable higher priority thing that had to happen. But, the other 90% of the time, if a meeting could be canceled, it probably should have been canceled in the first place. And when I was reading this, I have a meeting further out in this week, and I'm not really going to be able to do much in that meeting. So I think what I'm going to do, instead of canceling it 5 minutes ahead of time, is cancel it. It might be a day ahead of time. But I need to just send an email and be like, yeah, I shouldn't be in this meeting. Here's an email to send to you as well. And but I don't know. It is an interesting thing. Like, think about if I could cancel this meeting 5 minutes before it happened. It's probably not a meeting that I need to have. And I like the mystery of this. Too many salads. I think this is, I don't know what he means by this, but what this made me think is I go to a lot of meetings. Well, not now, but back when you would go to meetings in person, where they order lunch in, right? And they'll ask, you can tell the amount of money that someone is going to be spending and the amount of money that the vendor would like you to spend by the quality of the catering that they have. If they're just bringing in the sandwiches from the sandwich shop, the kind of tray of things with probably like large stick of butter cookies, it's probably a high volume, low price sort of sale that you're going for. But if there's individual orders from some restaurant you've never heard of, even if it comes in a plastic container, it's probably a higher end sale that you're involved in. You might bring in some organic juices and things. But this too many salads thing was making me think. It's an interesting sort of silly, delightful rule of thumb that maybe the more leftover salads there were, the sort of like less critical that meeting might have been, or at least the amount of people in that meeting, because you have so much stuff left over. So the ability to order the exact amount of food is probably indicative of how well planned out that meeting was, and probably how successful it's going to be, or how close you'll get to success because of your ability to actually know how many people were going to be there, when they were going to be there, and what they wanted. Now, of course, when you're trying to be a good host, you're always going to overorder, right? Like, you always want a certain amount of slack in the system. I don't know what that is, if that's 5 to 10% more than you actually need or whatever it is. So you don't want to have the exact amount. You always need slack in the system. But if there is a huge amount of stuff left over, something probably went weird. I guess there could be there's another footnote that maybe There's sort of like a minimum order that you need to do. I went to go get some, I don't know how to say it in Dutch, but oliebollen. They're basically deep fried. We would call it a funnel cake bread back in the States. But if you imagine about this big, like a big meatball size of the funnel cake bread that's deep fried. And I was ordering some, and I wanted to get 4. And the person was like, oh, for €5, you can get 5. If you add one more, it doesn't cost that much more. And of course, you're just like, okay, whatever. I'll get one more, right? So maybe there's situations like that. But, try to watch out for too many salads. Speaking of too many salads, are you thinking, boy, I got to figure out this Kubernetes stuff. It's important. I really need to make sure that we're not just gratuitously doing it. And also I want to make sure I skill up on it. And I could go to a large meeting where there's too many salads, but maybe it would be better if individuals just studied on their own time and we kind of really focused on bigger group efforts when people needed it. Well, we've got something for you. If you go to Kube Academy, which is a total domain name, it's not kubeacademy.com, it's just kube.academy. We have a tremendous amount, as I'll show you, of free courses you can sign up for. And, by course, it's a guided online thing that will get you started from all the beginning. You can go through, containers and Kubernetes, 20 courses, 18 hours, all sorts of stuff. We're always adding, look, there's Cora. She's on my team. I'm scheduling to have some of these people on here. But you've got all sorts of courses that you can go through. Let's take a look in here. All right. So, you can go in depth. Why would you want to go in shallow? I don't know. And all sorts of other stuff. Take an exam, build images. I mean, I don't know why I haven't taken these yet. Now, let's take a look at what is pro. What does that mean? Is pro something I can sign up for? A pro, you can be a pro. Ooh. So once I sign up as a pro, I can do even more. I can do these in-depth ones. Well, that's fun. But, it's all free. So you should definitely sign up for that. And, just bring your own salad. BYOS is what you need to do for learning that. So finally, I wanted to go over a paper that I was reading or looking over. Now, it's a Gartner PDF, so that means that it means a couple of things. One, it's highly likely you don't have access to it unless you're fortunate enough to have a seat for Gartner. Now, I used to be an analyst, so I feel okay complaining about this kind of stuff because I used to have my stuff behind a paywall because that's how we got paid. Turns out if you give away stuff for free, you don't get paid for it. It's just crazy revelation there. But the other thing is I can't really show you anything or excerpt from it because Gartner, like other analyst firms, I don't really know how this is necessarily legal. It might be more of a licensing thing than a copyright thing because I feel like when I was remembering how you do research, as long as you attribute material that you've used, obviously not the entire paper. I can't just be writing a book and excerpt and print an entire other book in it. But, you can refer to tables and things like that as long as you cite it. When I was going through things, I learned that was what one does. But analyst houses are not like that. You basically have to go through this process of asking them to do things. And I was thinking this is a really cool table. I should ask for permission to use that, but they always want to see the context it's in. I don't know, maybe I should try to do this and be like, I don't know, it's a live broadcast. I make it up about 15 minutes before I talk. Not sure what I'm going to say. Here's my intention of using it. That would be wonderful to see what their review process says about that. However, there's this paper here. Let me look it up for you so you can kind of see at least what's on the web called Winning in the Turns, a CIO Action Guide. Now, it's from July 2019, so before COVID stuff, but it kind of reads as if it was written in this. But the point that they're making in this paper, it's a point that I make often as well, and many people do, is that positive change generally only happens in a crisis or in a difficult situation. And they use this analogy from race car drivers and also speed skaters. Any place where you're racing against someone around a circle, that it's in the turns that you kind of often make your move, right? So there's so much weird variability and stuff in a turn rather than the stability of a straight course. It's a pretty good analogy, actually, although I don't like sports analogies because I don't know anything about sports. But when you're going through a turn, everyone's turning and there's variability in it. And, depending on your position in the curve, you'll go faster than someone else. So that's where people often make their move. So it's kind of an interesting look at when you're thinking through strategy and you're also thinking ahead of that curve. You're also thinking ahead of the turn, how you think about your IT strategy and how you prioritize doing things. And in particular, there's a table, which I am not going to show you. Perhaps I'll ask permission to show at some point. But that goes over the types of turns, the types of challenges that are there. And then there's a pretty good discussion of how you can start thinking about addressing those from a CIO, from an IT perspective. Now, it's only 18 pages, which because of summaries, charts, front and back matter means that it's basically 12 pages in a PDF with wide margins. So you're talking about, I don't know, let's say 2,000 words? I should go count, but that would be my estimate, is like maybe 2,000 words. So obviously it's not going to solve your problems, but it really, I think there's good stuff in there to kind of give you a push to start planning out how you want to go about doing things. So definitely, I'll put a link to that in the final show notes here, but you should go check that out. Speaking of things you should check out, are you interested in how application development, how the process of managing application development, all the way from product management to actually the way you manage big spools of data and do things like reactive or do things with Java, or think about how do we do a growth board to manage all the products across our enterprise? How do I manage Kubernetes? Well, we've got a great resource for you, also free. You see it here? All you got to do, let me do it for you. All you have to do, you can go up here after you've read that great Gartner paper, and you type in, I always wonder, what do you see that I often go to? Tanzu. Okay, that all looks good. Nothing embarrassing there. You go to tanzu.vmware.com/developer. You see that? Then what you're going to load up here is you can see we've got like some interesting stuff here, kind of highlights. But then there's all these topics you can explore for free. I mean, we make money elsewise, so we don't have to charge for content. But you should go check that out. If you just go to tanzu.vmware.com/developer, all sorts of stuff to look in there. Well, that's all I got going for this episode. Let me make a mention that I should add. See, I can't. That book on saying no, Rand's, let's call it too many salads problem. 5-minute cancel. I forget if I mentioned anything else, but those are fun things to look at. Oh, also, you should check out. I mentioned book of, I always like to say El Reg. Columns. Now, this is my own personal book, but it's pretty good. It's got a foreword from John Willis, if you know him from DevOps. Or maybe you are much older in the IT world and you know him from his Tivoli days. That would be fun to, next time you talk with John Willis, just talk about Tivoli stuff and mainframes. But he was very sweet to write a foreword for that book, which just thinking about it now makes me feel all warm and fuzzy. But that's what we got going on this week. As always, if you want to get the show notes for this episode, you can go to Cotate. I'll show you. You go to cotate.io/Tanzu Talk. You can see the most recent video, a playlist of all the videos, and the listing of past shows there. You can click on the links for things. And if you're interested in those calls to actions, and you can get both of my books for free, 2 of the books, I should say, for free that go over a lot of what I talk about, the old business bottleneck and monolithic transformation. You can just type into your old browser or your new one, cote.pizza, and go to it directly. And with that, I got to go pick up my kids, so I'll see everyone next time. Bye-bye.